The sirens were already echoing through the street when the patrol lights flashed red and blue. The black man in blue surgical scrubs pulled his car to the side of the road, just seconds from the hospital entrance. A stethoscope swung against his chest as he stepped out, breathless, holding his hospital ID up with shaking hands. "Officer, please," he said, forcing his voice to stay calm. "I'm a cardiac surgeon. There's an emergency surgery happening right now. A patient is coding inside." The officer didn't look at the badge. Didn't look at the scrubs. Didn't look at the hospital behind him. He looked at the man's skin. "Step back," the officer said. Traffic slowed. Drivers stared. Phones came out. Someone started recording. Inside the hospital, a woman's heart had stopped beating. Doctors were counting seconds. Every minute without oxygen meant permanent damage. Every delay brought her closer to death. Outside, on the asphalt, the one man who could save her life was being treated like a threat. "I don't have time for this," the surgeon said. "Call the hospital. Verify me. Please." The officer's hand moved to his belt. "Hands behind your back." The handcuffs snapped shut. The sound was sharp. Final. Cold metal closed around the hands that had saved countless lives. The black doctor was forced to his knees as traffic crawled past and strangers watched in silence. The hospital doors stood open behind him, close enough to see, but not close enough to reach. Inside, a heart monitor flatlined. What no one at that traffic stop knew, what no one would realize until it was almost too late, was that the woman dying inside that hospital wasn't just any patient. She was the wife of the city's police chief. And in less than 11 minutes, this arrest would expose a truth powerful people had spent years burying. Before we continue, take a moment and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, your city or country. I want to see how far this story reaches. And if this story resonates with you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support motivates me to bring you even stronger, new stories like this. The morning began quietly, the kind of quiet that only exists before the weight of the day settles in. The black doctor stood at the stove in his small kitchen, flipping pancakes as sunlight spilled through the window. The radio played softly in the background, something cheerful that didn't quite match the seriousness etched into his face. He moved with practiced precision, the same calm control that defined him inside an operating room. Across the counter, his teenage daughter sat hunched over a textbook, half listening, half worrying about a quiz she hadn't studied enough for. She tapped her pencil against the page, then looked up. "You're still coming on Thursday, right?" she asked. He slid a pancake onto her plate, perfectly golden. "Thursday at 2, he said. "I wouldn't miss it." She smiled. It was the same smile her mother used to have. He noticed it every day. 6 years had passed since cancer took his wife and left him to raise their daughter alone. Some mornings, the resemblance brought comfort. Other mornings, it hurt more than he cared to admit. But he never let that pain show. Not here. Not to her. The kitchen walls held reminders of the life they'd built since then, school photos, hospital schedules taped to the fridge, and one framed photograph he paused in front of before leaving every morning. It showed him in surgical scrubs beside an older doctor, both smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. A mentor. A teacher. A man who once told him that steady hands mattered more than anything else. He touched the frame briefly, then grabbed his keys. After dropping his daughter at school, he drove straight to the hospital. It was a routine he could follow without thinking, one that grounded him in a world that often demanded too much. The hospital sat above the city like a quiet promise, hope for some, fear for others. Inside, nurses greeted him with familiarity and respect. "Morning, doctor," one of them said. "Busy day ahead." "Always is," he replied, offering a small smile. He changed into fresh blue scrubs and clipped his ID to his chest. Around him, the hospital hummed with movement, stretchers rolling past, monitors beeping, voices calling out instructions. This was where he belonged. Where his hands mattered. People trusted those hands with their lives. By the time he checked the surgical board, everything looked routine. No emergencies. No warnings. Just another day that promised to be long, demanding, and meaningful. None of them knew that within hours, those same hands would be locked behind his back, while someone's heart stopped beating just a few steps away. The hospital never truly slept. Even in its quieter moments, it breathed, machines humming, carts rolling, voices echoing softly down long corridors washed in fluorescent light. For the Black Doctor, this rhythm was familiar. Comforting, even. It was the sound of purpose. As he walked through the cardiac wing, nurses nodded in recognition. Not the forced politeness reserved for authority, but the genuine acknowledgement given to someone who had earned trust over years of difficult cases and longer nights. "Good morning," a nurse called out as she adjusted in 4-line. "Morning," he replied, already scanning a patient chart as he walked. Near the nurse's station, a woman in her late 40s paused when she saw him. She had been on the cardiac floor for more than 2 decades. She'd seen surgeons come and go, brilliant ones, careless ones, and a few who should never have been allowed near an operating table. She smiled when she saw him. "If I ever end up on that table," she said quietly, "I want your hands. No one else's." He nodded, the compliment landing heavier than praise ever did. "Let's make sure that doesn't happen," he said. But they both knew better. In this hospital, when time ran out and hearts failed, he was the one they called. The one who stayed steady when others panicked. The one whose hands didn't shake, even when the room did. He changed into fresh scrubs and clipped his ID onto his chest. The badge photo was old, taken years earlier, but the eyes were the same. Focused. Alert. Tired in a way that came from responsibility, not weakness. He checked the surgical board. 3 procedures scheduled. Nothing urgent. No red flags. The kind of day that lulled people into thinking disaster always came with warning. Down the hall, residents debated treatment plans. Somewhere nearby, a heart monitor beeped steadily, each rhythm a reminder of how fragile life really was. He passed a waiting room where families sat quietly, hands clasped, hope and fear sharing the same space. This was where he mattered. Outside these walls, he was often reminded of what he was, a black man navigating a world that questioned him before it knew him. But here, inside the hospital, he was defined by skill. By outcomes. By lives saved. At least, that's what he believed. He reviewed a chart, made a few notes, and glanced at the clock. Still early. Plenty of time. He had no way of knowing that the calm around him was already thinning. That somewhere in the building, events were beginning to move faster than anyone expected. And that soon, none of the respect he had earned inside these walls would matter once he stepped outside them. The sound cut through the hospital like a blade. Code Blue. The announcement crackled over the intercom, sharp and unmistakable. Code Blue. Emergency room. Every conversation stopped. Every step changed direction. The Black Doctor looked up from the chart in his hands. His body reacted before his mind did. Years of training took over as he turned and moved, already calculating distances, already counting seconds. A code blue meant one thing: a heart had stopped. Inside the emergency room, a patient was dying. He broke into a fast walk, then a run, weaving through staff as they rushed toward the same destination. Somewhere ahead, alarms were sounding, high, frantic beeps that grew louder with every step. He reached the stairwell and hesitated for half a second. The elevator would be slow. Too slow. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his breath steady, controlled. Panic was useless here. Panic wasted oxygen. As he descended, he ran the numbers in his head. 4 minutes without oxygen could cause permanent brain damage. 5 minutes could mean death. Every minute after that reduced survival odds by nearly 10%. When he reached the lower floor, a nurse met him at the doorway, breathless. "Cardiac arrest," she said. "Female. Mid-50s. No name yet." Names didn't matter in moments like this. Hearts did. He glanced toward the main corridor that led directly to the ER. It was crowded, stretchers, staff, visitors in the way. He checked his watch again, then made a decision. "There's a faster way," he said, already turning. He pushed through a side exit and into the open air. The late afternoon light hit him hard as he crossed toward the road that ran alongside the hospital. If he cut across and entered through the emergency entrance on the other side, he could save precious seconds. Seconds mattered. His shoes hit the pavement as he moved quickly, stethoscope bouncing against his chest. He could already picture the trauma bay, the monitor, the patient, the team waiting. Inside the hospital, hands were already on the woman's chest. CPR had begun. Someone was calling out vitals. Someone else was counting compressions. Outside, the black doctor headed straight toward the road, focused on only one thing: getting there in time. He didn't see the patrol car until the lights came on. Red and blue exploded against the afternoon sky. And just like that, everything slowed down. The patrol car blocked half the road. Red and blue lights flashed violently, bouncing off passing windshields and the glass facade of the hospital just ahead. The black doctor slowed, confused for only a second, then stepped toward the officers with urgency written across his face. "Officer," he said quickly, holding up his hospital ID. "I'm a cardiac surgeon. There's a code blue inside. I need to get to the emergency room right now." One officer stepped forward. Younger. Uncertain. His hand hovered near his radio. The other officer followed more slowly. Older. Colder. He didn't rush. He didn't look at the hospital entrance just yards away. He looked at the man standing in front of him, scrubs, stethoscope, ID, and his eyes narrowed. "You were speeding," the officer said. "I'm responding to a medical emergency," the doctor replied. His voice stayed controlled, professional. "You can call the hospital. They're waiting for me." The officer took the ID but barely glanced at it. "This doesn't look like you." "It's an old photo," the doctor said. "Please. Every second matters." Traffic began to back up. A horn blared somewhere behind them. Drivers craned their necks, curious. Phones appeared in hands. Inside the hospital, a nurse shouted, "No pulse." Someone started counting compressions out loud. The officer handed the ID back without scanning it. "Step away from the road." "What?" the doctor said, stunned. "No. I need to." "Step away," the officer repeated, louder now. The doctor took a breath. He could feel his heart pounding, but his hand stayed steady. "There is a woman dying inside that building," he said, pointing toward the hospital. "I am the surgeon assigned to her. You are delaying medical care." The officer's jaw tightened. "You don't tell me what I'm doing." The younger officer shifted his weight, glancing between the doctor and the hospital doors. "Sergeant, maybe we should." "Stay where you are," the older officer snapped. He stepped closer to the doctor. "Too close." "Turn around," he said. "I can't," the doctor replied. "I won't." "Call the ER." "Verify me." Traffic slowed to a crawl. A woman leaned out of her car window, phone raised, recording everything. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else shook their head and drove on. Inside the emergency room, the monitor screamed, a long, continuous tone. "Flatline." The officer's hand moved to his cuffs. "Hands behind your back." The words landed heavy. "This is a mistake," the doctor said, his voice breaking for the first time. "You are wasting time." The cuffs closed around his wrists with a sharp metallic click. Cold. Final. The black doctor, the man trained to hold failing hearts in his hands, was pushed forward and forced down onto the asphalt. Traffic rolled past. Strangers watched. No one intervened. The hospital entrance stood open just beyond the road, close enough to see nurses running inside, close enough to hear the chaos, but unreachable. Inside, a heart had stopped beating. And outside, the man who could restart it was kneeling on the ground in handcuffs. Minutes dragged by like hours. The black doctor remained on his knees, hands locked behind his back, the rough texture of asphalt biting into his skin. He could hear his own breathing, controlled, measured, fighting against the panic rising in his chest. Inside the hospital, he knew exactly what was happening. Chest compressions. Epinephrine. Defibrillator charged. Every second without him there increased the chance that the woman inside would never wake up the same. "Please," he said again, quieter now. "Call the emergency room. They are waiting for me." The older officer spoke into his radio, his voice casual, unhurried, as if time were not the most critical variable in the equation. The younger officer stood nearby, eyes flicking toward the hospital entrance, his unease growing with every passing moment. A nurse burst through the emergency doors and froze when she saw him. Her face drained of color. "That's our surgeon," she shouted. "What are you doing? Let him go, now." "Ma'am, step back," the older officer replied without turning. "This is a police matter." "He's the only cardiac surgeon on duty," she said. "There's a woman dying in there." The officer didn't respond. 4 minutes passed. 4 minutes of radio chatter. 4 minutes of shouting from inside the hospital. 4 minutes of a heart struggling without the care it needed. Finally, the radio crackled. The officer listened. Nodded once. He walked behind the doctor and unlocked the cuffs. "You're free to go," he said flatly. No apology. No urgency. No acknowledgement of what had been taken. The doctor stood, wrists burning, and took off running before the words even finished leaving the officer's mouth. He didn't look back. He didn't say anything. He sprinted across the road and through the emergency entrance, pushing past staff as the sounds of alarms swallowed him whole. The clock on the wall read 11 minutes since the code had been called. Inside Trauma Bay 1, chaos filled the room. A woman lay motionless on the gurney, her chest rising and falling under the force of another doctor's compressions. The heart monitor flickered erratically, the rhythm unstable and dangerous. "She lost pulse again," someone said. The black doctor stepped in without hesitation. "I've got it," he said. He took over immediately, direct, focused, efficient. Orders were given. Tools were passed. Time blurred into motion and muscle memory. For 52 seconds, the monitor showed nothing. A flat, merciless line. Then, one beat. Another. A rhythm returned. The woman was alive. But when the room finally exhaled, the truth settled in quietly and heavily. The delay had mattered. The damage was done. And none of it had to happen. The room slowly returned to a controlled calm. Machines still beeped, nurses still moved, but the panic had faded into something heavier, something closer to reckoning. The black doctor stood beside the gurney, gloves stained, chest rising and falling as his breathing finally caught up with him. The woman was alive. That was the victory. But victories in medicine were rarely clean. A resident read off numbers from the monitor, her voice steady but tight. Blood pressure stabilized. Oxygen levels climbed back into a survivable range. The immediate danger had passed. The doctor listened, nodding once, already knowing what the next part would bring. A scan confirmed it. The prolonged lack of oxygen had injured the heart muscle. Not enough to kill her. Enough to change her life forever. A senior physician spoke quietly near the foot of the bed. Left ventricular function is significantly reduced. Another added, "She'll need a pacemaker. And long-term care." No one said the obvious. 11 minutes. 11 minutes was the difference between recovery and permanent damage. Between a heart that healed and one that never would. The doctor removed his gloves and stepped back, his hands steady but his jaw clenched. Those hands had done everything right, everything possible. But medicine could not undo time stolen by ignorance and authority. As the patient was wheeled toward recovery, he caught a glimpse of her face. Silver hair. Pale skin. Lines of age and a life lived carefully. She looked ordinary. Vulnerable. Not powerful. Not protected. Just human. A nurse approached him quietly. "She made it because of you." He nodded, but the words didn't land. Because he knew something else was also true. She made it despite what had been done outside. He washed his hands slowly at the sink, the water running hot against his skin. The room reflected back at him, bright lights, steel surfaces, a world built on precision and trust. Outside these walls, that trust had failed him. As he stepped out of the trauma bay, conversations hushed. Staff looked at him differently now, not with doubt, but with something closer to discomfort. They had seen him kneeling in handcuffs through the glass doors. They had seen the delay. And they had seen the outcome. In the hallway, he overheard two administrators speaking in low voices. "Who was the patient?" one asked. There was a pause. Then the answer came, barely above a whisper. "The police chief's wife." The doctor stopped walking. The weight of that truth settled slowly, unmistakably. The system that had stopped him. The authority that had humiliated him. The delay that caused permanent harm. It had nearly destroyed one of its own. And it had done it without hesitation. The words followed him down the hallway. The police chief's wife. They echoed in his head as he walked past recovery rooms and nurses' stations, past faces that suddenly avoided his eyes. Just minutes earlier, he had been a surgeon responding to a code. Now, he was something else entirely, a man caught inside a truth too large to ignore. He stopped near a window overlooking the parking lot. From this angle, he could see the stretch of road where it had happened. The flashing lights were gone. Traffic moved freely again. To anyone passing by, it looked like nothing had ever gone wrong. But he knew better. The irony settled in slowly, like a pressure building behind the ribs. The system that had questioned him. The authority that had forced him to the ground. The officers who refused to listen. They had delayed him while their own chief's wife lay dying just steps away. A nurse approached quietly, lowering her voice. "Administration wants a report," she said. "About the delay." He nodded. Of course they did. Inside a small conference room, two administrators sat across from him, their expressions carefully neutral. A recorder sat on the table between them. "Just walk us through what happened," one of them said. "From the moment you left the building." He did. Calmly. Precisely. The traffic stop. The cuffs. The time lost. He stuck to facts, because facts were the only protection he had ever trusted. Neither administrator interrupted. When he finished, one of them cleared his throat. "We understand this was upsetting," he said. "But given who the patient is, this situation may attract attention." Attract attention. The doctor stared at him. "What matters," the administrator continued, "is how this looks." There it was. Not what happened. Not what was lost. But how it would be perceived. As he left the room, his phone vibrated in his pocket. Messages were already coming in, colleagues, friends, numbers he didn't recognize. Outside, somewhere beyond the hospital walls, the first video had been uploaded. A clip less than 3 minutes long. A black man in surgical scrubs. Handcuffed at a traffic stop. A hospital visible in the background. By the time the sun set, it would be everywhere. And by morning, the story would no longer belong to him. The call came the next morning. Not from a colleague. Not from a friend. From the hospital's legal department. He sat at his kitchen table, coffee untouched, listening as the voice on the other end spoke carefully, each word chosen to protect the institution, not the man who worked for it. "Effective immediately," the lawyer said, "you are being placed on administrative leave pending review." Administrative leave. It sounded neutral. Harmless. But he knew what it meant. "You're sidelining me," he said. "We're protecting the hospital," the voice replied. "Given the attention this incident is receiving, this is standard procedure." Standard. He ended the call without arguing. Years in medicine had taught him when words were useless. An hour later, another announcement followed, this one on every local news channel. The district attorney stood behind a podium, cameras pointed directly at him. His tone was calm, measured, convincing. "Our investigation has determined that delays in treatment contributed to permanent injury," he said. "We are reviewing the actions of all parties involved." All parties. The doctor felt his stomach tighten. Then came the words that changed everything. Based on available evidence, the surgeon's conduct during the traffic stop may have contributed to the delay in care. As such, charges are being considered. The screen showed a still image from the video, the doctor in handcuffs, head lowered, frozen in a moment stripped of context. By afternoon, the headline had changed. "Doctor faces charges after traffic stop delays surgery." The doctor read it once. Then again. Somehow, the narrative had shifted. The cuffs were no longer the problem. The delay was no longer the officer's fault. It was his. That evening, 2 officers arrived at the hospital. Not the same ones. These wore different expressions, polite, professional, rehearsed. They found him in the physician's lounge, sitting alone, still in scrubs he no longer had permission to wear. He stood when they entered. "We're here to place you under arrest," one of them said. "Reckless endangerment." The words hung in the air. Colleagues watched through the glass walls. Nurses. Doctors. People whose lives he had saved. Some looked away. Some stared in disbelief. No one spoke. As the cuffs closed around his wrists again, cameras flashed outside the building. This time, the arrest was clean. Controlled. Documented. This time, the system was ready. His daughter saw it live on her phone. She didn't cry. She just stared at the screen, learning something no child should have to learn, that truth does not protect you when power decides otherwise. As he was led away, the doctor finally understood. The traffic stop had never been the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The first person to notice that something didn't add up wasn't a lawyer. It was a reporter. She had seen hundreds of police videos in her career, traffic stops, arrests, body cam footage released with carefully worded statements attached. This one felt different. Not because of the cuffs, but because of what wasn't being addressed. The hospital in the background. The urgency in the doctor's voice. The refusal to verify something that could have been confirmed in seconds. She watched the video again, this time with the sound off. Without the audio, the scene looked worse. A black man in medical scrubs. Hands raised. Officers unmoved. A hospital entrance just steps away. The reporter pulled public records. The officers involved. Their history. Complaints filed and quietly dismissed. Patterns that were easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. Then she searched the archives. 8 years earlier, buried deep in a local paper, she found a short article. No photo. No follow-up. Local man dies after traffic stop. The details were vague. The officer's name was familiar. So was the location. She leaned back in her chair, heart pounding, and opened another file. Internal affairs records, mostly sealed, but not all of them. Enough names. Enough dates. The same officer appeared again. Different incident. Different victim. Same conclusion. No wrongdoing found. The reporter reached out to a contact inside the department. A man close to retirement. Someone who had seen enough to know when silence was being used as a tool. They met outside the city, in a place where no one asked questions. "This case," she said, sliding a photo across the table, "does it remind you of anything?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he nodded once. Yes. What happened back then? She asked. He exhaled slowly. Nothing, he said. That's the problem. When she left the meeting, she knew two things. The doctor was being set up to absorb blame. And whatever really happened during that traffic stop wasn't the first time power had erased the truth. It was just the first time someone decided not to look away. The retired officer didn't want to talk at first. They sat in a quiet diner just outside the county line, the kind of place people passed through but never stayed. The coffee was bad. The booths were cracked. And no one from the department ever came here. That traffic stop from 8 years ago, the reporter said carefully, the one that ended in a death. You were assigned to it. The man stared into his cup. I wrote the report, he said finally. Then I watched it disappear. He explained how the investigation had unfolded, or rather, how it hadn't. Witness statements collected and then retracted. Evidence logged and later marked inconclusive. A medical examiner's note quietly reclassified. Every question answered before it was asked. And the officer? The reporter pressed. Still wearing a badge, the man replied. Still getting protected. The reporter felt the pieces locking into place. 2 incidents. Years apart. Same officer. Same outcome. She requested additional documents, overtime logs, assignment orders, radio traffic summaries. Most were redacted. Some were missing entirely. But the gaps told their own story. The officer involved in both cases had logged hundreds of hours of unexplained overtime. Always approved. Always signed by the same supervisor. The police chief. The reporter's hands tightened around the file. This wasn't negligence. It was coordination. Meanwhile, the doctor sat in his living room, the house unnaturally quiet. His daughter stayed with relatives now, away from cameras and whispers. The walls felt emptier without her voice, her footsteps. Legal papers covered the table. Charges. Court dates. Language designed to reduce a life to bullet points. His attorney explained the options with clinical precision. If you plead, she said, you'll avoid prison. You may lose your license temporarily, but it could be reinstated. And if I don't? He asked. She hesitated. Then they will make an example of you. The doctor looked at his hands resting on the table. These hands had saved lives. Now they were evidence. Across the city, the reporter published her first article. It didn't accuse. It didn't speculate. It asked questions. Why was a surgeon arrested during a medical emergency? Why had verification taken so long? Why did the same officer appear in another fatal traffic stop years earlier? The response was immediate. The department issued a statement denying any connection. The police chief called the reporting irresponsible. Commentators dismissed it as coincidence. But people started reading. And once they did, they couldn't stop seeing the pattern. The pressure came quickly. The reporter's phone began filling with warnings disguised as advice. Editors urged caution. Sources went quiet. Anonymous messages arrived late at night, reminding her that powerful people rarely lost. Then her car brakes failed at a red light. She survived. Barely. The police report called it an accident. Across town, the doctor received a different kind of message. A plain envelope. No return address. Inside, a single line. Stop fighting. Think about your family. That night, his attorney slid a document across the table. A plea deal. No prison time. A suspended license. A quiet end to the case. All he had to do was admit fault. He stared at the paper for a long time, knowing exactly what it was asking him to surrender, not just his career, but the truth. Outside the system, silence was being offered as mercy. Inside it, resistance was being punished. The woman woke to the steady rhythm of a machine keeping her heart alive. A pacemaker. Permanent. Unavoidable. From her hospital bed, she watched the news coverage replay the same footage again and again, the black doctor in scrubs, handcuffed near the hospital, pleading to be let go. Her husband stood on television later that day, uniform pressed, voice steady, promising accountability. He never mentioned the delay. Never mentioned the cuffs. Never mentioned the doctor who saved her life. But she remembered everything. She remembered waking up weak, confused, and afraid. She remembered overhearing fragments of conversations before the surgery, words like slow things down and keep the area clear. At the time, they meant nothing. Now, they meant everything. That night, while her husband slept, she made a call she had never made before. "I need to tell the truth," she said quietly into the phone. For the first time since her heart stopped, she felt it beat on its own, stronger, steadier. And somewhere across the city, a man deciding whether to accept a plea deal would soon learn that the story was no longer his to fight alone. The truth didn't come from a confession. It came from a recording. A retired internal affairs officer, pushed by conscience and time, found what was never meant to be heard again, a backup copy of radio traffic from the morning of the incident. Not erased. Just forgotten. Two voices filled the room. One belonged to the officer at the traffic stop. The other belonged to the police chief. "Stay near the hospital," the chief said. "Keep the area clear." A pause. "Slow them down." The words were calm. Casual. Planned. The timestamp told the rest of the story. Hours before the cardiac arrest. Hours before the cuffs. Hours before a heart stopped beating. This wasn't a mistake. It was intent. When the recording was played for the doctor's attorney, no one spoke. The plea deal on the table suddenly meant nothing. The system had tried to bury the truth. Instead, it had preserved it. The courtroom was full before the doors even opened. Cameras waited outside. Reporters filled the benches. The air carried the low tension of something long overdue. When the black doctor took his seat, he kept his eyes forward, hands folded, steady as they had always been. The prosecution spoke first. Procedures. Protocols. Carefully chosen words meant to sound reasonable. Then the defense stood. The recording was played. The room went silent. "Slow them down." The chief's voice echoed through the courtroom, calm and unmistakable. The timestamp glowed on the screen behind the witness stand. A murmur spread through the gallery. The officer from the traffic stop was called next. He avoided eye contact. When asked about the order, he hesitated, just long enough. "I was told to keep the area clear," he admitted. "Clear of what?" He didn't answer. Then the woman took the stand. The police chief's wife. She spoke plainly. About the delay. About the doctor who saved her life. About the words she had heard that morning and the truth she could no longer ignore. When she finished, the judge didn't hesitate. The charges against the doctor were dismissed. Immediately. Arrest warrants were issued instead, for the officer and for the police chief himself. As the cuffs closed around the chief's wrists, the room didn't cheer. It exhaled. For the first time since the traffic stop, the system had nowhere left to hide. The doctor returned to the hospital quietly. There were no cameras this time. No statements. No applause. Just the familiar hum of machines and the steady rhythm of work that never stopped. His badge was reactivated without ceremony. His locker was exactly where he left it. Some colleagues nodded when they saw him. Others said nothing. He didn't expect more. Justice, he had learned, rarely arrived with celebration. His daughter came home that weekend. She hugged him tightly, holding on longer than before. Neither of them talked about the video. They didn't need to. It lived in both of them now, a reminder of how fragile truth could be, and how necessary it was to protect. Across the city, the police chief waited for trial. The officer from the traffic stop accepted a plea deal. Old cases were reopened. Questions long ignored were finally being asked. And the woman whose heart had stopped began to heal. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. She sent a letter to the hospital a month later. No names. Just a sentence written in careful handwriting. Thank you for not letting my heart stop, even when the world tried to. The doctor read it once, then placed it in his locker. The road near the hospital still carried traffic every day. Sirens still echoed. Power still existed. But something had shifted, quietly, permanently. A badge, after all, was a responsibility. And silence was no longer guaranteed. End.